Today's video will discuss how a fruit tree responds to topping and how we can slowly lead it to recovery. Some of the stress and damage is permanent. If you watch till the end, you'll be able to see what can be done in a similar scenario. We've talked a lot about tipping fruit trees, and the reason we do that is to stimulate new growth. It also reduces height. It opens up the canopy to allow sunlight to penetrate that canopy and help in the fruit development on the spurs that are on older wood. Usually when we talk about tipping, we also mention that tipping is very different than topping. And this apple tree, you can see very clearly it has been topped, meaning rather than just lightly cutting small branches or thinning some larger branches, this tree has had every single large branch just cut off completely. A tree like this can have large branches removed like this if years prior the gardener has developed some of the internal growth, water sprouts and spurs to support these large branches. But if we come into a tree that has not a lot of young wood on the interior and you just cut the top off, it causes a lot of stress to a tree this size. We've got a branch over here that is just barely hanging on. It did put on a few water sprouts, but for the most part it's on its way out. We're probably just going to cut it out completely because it's so weak that it becomes susceptible to disease. Some of these stronger branches that have a lot of new growth, you can see that I've gotten started already on this one. We're going to go ahead and just tip most everything to stimulate more growth so that we have more surface area, more leaves to collect energy so that we can feed this branch so that it continues to persist into the future. We don't want to be too aggressive. We're not worried about fruit. There are no spurs on this tree because everything that was mature that had the spurs has been removed, and mostly what we have now is just last year's new growth. And I want to keep the majority of it, but I am thinning a few out that could become structural problems or could rub or could kind of interfere with the tree's ability to collect light this coming summer. And so we're going to do our best to try to rescue this tree through pruning. Hopefully within a couple of years it will recover. It will probably always have a few problems. My guess is that some disease will be introduced into this tree, but for the most part we're going to do our best to try to save the tree from topping. This apple tree was brutally topped, and when we took it over, the tree had responded to its topping by sending up thousands of adventitious branches, which are the water sprouts. And so what we did is we carefully thinned out a few of the water sprouts that were too close together. We tipped back the remaining ones to allow for the branches to fork. You can see that some of the damage from the topping, some of the permanent damage is the sunburn that occurs as the canopy isn't big enough to shade this older mature bark. It burns and peels and falls off. Also just where some of the damage was, and the wood's exposed, we have a little mushroom growing here, so there's going to be some heartwood rot. So the tree's probably still going to decline over the years, but we have extended its life just by tipping those water sprouts and bringing some of the canopy back. And so today I'm not going to do a whole lot. I'll probably continue to thin a few of these branches, but there's a lot of spurs developing. This tree can still produce quite a bit of fruit for several years. And so my recommendation in a situation like this where there is a tree that's in decline, take advantage of the fruit while you can, but get a new tree started so that you've got something kind of maturing while this one declines. So I'm going to go ahead and just thin a few of those branches out, maybe point some of the ones that I want to keep in the right direction, but I do want to keep developing this canopy because that's what's going to feed the tree and extend the life of the tree as long as possible. This is year 3 after this tree was brutally topped, and we thinned out some of the water sprouts that came up from the pruning cuts made a few years ago, and we tipped back branches and pointed them in the right direction to try to reestablish this canopy. And now that we've had some time for this to grow, you can see here where we have a pruning cut right there, where we tipped a branch, a pruning cut right there, and a pruning cut right there. And every time we make those pruning cuts, we're stimulating more growth to fill out that canopy. And now we have all of these spurs growing on that 3-year-old branch. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised at how well this tree has been able to recover from that topping. This whole back side of the tree is still pretty bare and bald, but the other side is developing up really nice, and we'll just keep tipping and directing and helping this tree to establish a new canopy, and hopefully with time it recovers. I pointed this out last year, that some damage on the trunk. These mushrooms growing out of the heartwood means that core of the tree is rotting away slowly. We have a lot of sun scald on this exposed side of the tree, but overall we are extending the life of this, and this tree is still going to develop a lot more fruit than a brand new tree would if planted in its place. And so it's just a process of slowly directing the tree and helping the tree to extend its life so that it can be productive. But eventually it may succumb to disease, and eventually it might just all come to an end.